Stockholm's risk blind spot. It was hidden in plain sight, embedded not in weakness, but in confidence earned over decades. Sweden's financial system was praised for discipline, transparency, and innovation. And because nothing appeared broken, one kind of risk went almost completely unseen. To understand how Stockholm developed a blind spot, we need to look at success rather than failure. Swedish banks were strong. Public finances were sound. Institutions embraced digitalization early, improving efficiency and access. Stability was not enforced through fear, but through trust. That trust still defines how the system sees itself today. The story begins with balance sheets that looked exemplary. Capital ratios exceeded requirements. Risk models were conservative by international standards. Loss histories were shallow. Compared to crisis-scarred systems elsewhere in Europe, Sweden appeared insulated. Risk was something managed, measured, and contained. But risk does not always reside where models look. As the system modernized, exposure shifted away from visible credit events and toward structure. Households relied heavily on variable rate borrowing. Banks depended on wholesale funding that rolled smoothly in calm conditions. Asset prices responded quickly to liquidity rather than income. None of this triggered alarms because nothing failed. Inside institutions, attention focused on resilience to shocks they understood. Recessions, unemployment, credit losses, these were modeled carefully. What received less attention was correlation. Many risks depended on the same assumption, that markets would remain liquid enough for adjustment to occur gradually. Early signals appeared quietly. Household leverage increased alongside rising asset values. Funding structures lengthened but remained sensitive to confidence. Digital speed compressed reaction time. When conditions changed, they would change everywhere at once. Yet because conditions had not changed before, the risk felt abstract. Regulators saw pieces of the picture, but not the whole. Each indicator on its own looked manageable. Together, they formed a dependency on continuous market function. The system was not fragile. It was synchronized. The blind spot was not ignorance. It was framing. Risk was defined as loss rather than interruption. Stress was imagined as shock rather than pause. And in a system optimized for smooth operation, interruption can be just as dangerous. Stockholm had not mismanaged risk. It had misunderstood where it lived. And when risk hides inside coordination and timing, it remains invisible until the moment it isn't. The blind spot persisted because outcomes kept validating the framework. Funding rolled smoothly. Markets absorbed volatility. Without disruption, households met payments, even as debt levels climbed. Each successful cycle reinforced belief that flexibility and liquidity would always arrive when needed. Inside banks, wholesale funding was treated as stable rather than conditional. Maturity mismatches were modeled, but rarely stressed under scenarios where multiple markets tightened simultaneously. The assumption was not reckless. It was historical. Sweden had never experienced a sudden stop under modern conditions. Housing reinforced the confidence. Prices adjusted slowly. Transactions cleared efficiently. Digital platforms accelerated access and response, giving the impression of control. Speed felt like resilience, but speed also compressed reaction windows. When everyone can move instantly, everyone can move together. Regulators focused on visible strengths. Capital buffers were high. Supervision was credible. Macroprudential tools were active. Each measure addressed known risks effectively. What remained unaddressed was interdependence. The system's strength depended on continued access to liquidity across markets that had never seized at the same time. External observers raised questions quietly. Variable rate exposure was unusually high. Household sensitivity to rates was concentrated. Funding relied on confidence that global markets would remain open. None of these factors were dangerous alone. Together, they created a dependency on uninterrupted flow. The blind spot was reinforced by success in stress elsewhere. When other systems faltered, Sweden held firm. That resilience became proof. Models were recalibrated to reflect survival rather than vulnerability. Risk narrowed conceptually just as exposure broadened structurally. What went unnoticed was behavioral convergence. Households responded similarly to incentives. Banks relied on the same funding windows. Markets reacted to the same signals. Diversity of response declined, even as stability appeared strong. The danger was not that Sweden's system would collapse. It was that it would adjust all at once. When correlation rises quietly, stress does not spread gradually. It arrives everywhere simultaneously. And because the system had never experienced interruption without loss, interruption itself remained invisible as a risk until conditions shifted just enough to reveal how thin the margin for synchronization truly was. The moment of exposure arrived without drama. Global conditions tightened modestly. Rates moved. Liquidity became selective rather than scarce. Under most systems, this would have been absorbed gradually. In Sweden, it triggered something different. Adjustment began everywhere at once. Households reacted quickly. Variable rate payments increased across the board. Spending slowed in parallel. Savings were drawn down simultaneously. None of this caused immediate distress, but it synchronized behavior in a way the system had never tested. Banks felt the shift through funding channels. Wholesale markets remained open, but terms changed abruptly. Rollovers shortened. Costs rose. Access depended on timing rather than availability. Funding was still there, but it demanded immediate response. Digital infrastructure amplified the effect. Decisions that once unfolded over weeks now happened in days. Borrowers refinanced simultaneously. Investors rebalanced at the same time. The system moved faster than its buffers were designed to absorb. Risk managers recognized the pattern too late to prevent it. Correlation, not loss, became a constraint. Capital remained strong. Credit quality held. Yet liquidity planning strained under synchronized demand. The blind spot had not been credit. It had been simultaneity. Regulators monitored developments closely. Stress indicators remained below thresholds. No institution was failing. Intervention felt unjustified. But behavior was shifting in ways models had not predicted. The system was adjusting not smoothly, but in clusters. What became clear was how narrow the margin for staggered response had been. The system's efficiency had removed slack. Speed had removed delay. When conditions changed, adjustment compressed into a short window that left little room for discretion. The blind spot was no longer theoretical. It was observable, not as collapse, but as compression. The system had not broken. It had tightened everywhere at once. That realization forced a new question. How do you manage risk when the danger is not failure, but synchronized reaction before anyone has time to respond? The response focused on breaking synchronization before it hardened into fragility. Swedish authorities did not target losses because losses were not the threat. They targeted timing. Measures were introduced to slow adjustment, creating space between reaction and consequence. Macroprudential tools were refined to stagger impact rather than amplify it. Amortization flexibility was adjusted to prevent simultaneous household tightening. Banks were encouraged to extend funding horizons and diversify access points. The goal was not to reduce risk-taking, but to desynchronize behavior. Institutions adapted quickly. Liquidity planning incorporated correlation as a primary variable. Stress scenarios expanded beyond shock to include pause and compression. Digital speed was acknowledged as both strength and risk. Systems were redesigned to introduce friction, where friction restored stability. Markets responded with relief rather than enthusiasm. Adjustment slowed. Behavior diversified. Not everyone moved at once anymore. Volatility became uneven instead of clustered. The system regained its ability to absorb change without forcing it through a single narrow window. Stockholm's blind spot did not produce collapse. It produced clarity. Risk was no longer defined solely by loss or leverage. It was defined by alignment. When too many actors respond the same way at the same time, even strong systems strain. The lesson extended beyond Sweden. Modern finance does not fail only through excess. It can fail through efficiency taken too far. Speed, transparency, and optimization can synchronize behavior until flexibility disappears. By confronting the blind spot early, Sweden preserved what mattered most. Trust remained intact. Institutions remained strong. And risk, once hidden inside coordination, became visible and manageable again. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? Stock